The great genius Nikola Tesla once said that if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Tesla became one of the most famous figures in the world at the turn of the 19th century, right when the great Indian mystic Sri Yukteswar said that the Dwapara Yuga, the energy age, truly began. The energy age will be characterized by the awakening of our intellect, the growing awareness of energies and self-interest. But the early centuries of this new age will also be extremely dangerous. And the big question is, will we make it through the danger zone? In this video, the follow-up to my last video on Sri Yukteswar's revision of the Yuga cycle, we're going to explore what it means to be living through the energy age. And we're going to consider the great opportunities and dangers that this shift presents. I'm your host, Dan Waits. This is World Astrology Report, and welcome to another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. If you're enjoying this video so far, then please do show your support for the channel by clicking the like button, subscribing to the channel, and enabling notifications. I'd also like to let you know about the next World Astrology Report live stream taking place on Saturday, August the 23rd at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. It's called The Demiurge at Work, How Saturn Cycles Structure Our Reality. Gnostic thinkers have suggested that Saturn represents the Demiurge, the false god that rules over material reality. In this talk, we're going to see how certain planetary cycles reveal Saturn's role in creating the institutions that structure and govern reality itself. In particular, we're going to see how conjunctions between Saturn and the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, coincide with the establishment of major global institutions, technologies, and belief systems, and signify major changes to the way power structures govern the world. You can purchase entry to this stream on the live streams page at worldastrologyreport.com, but entry is also free for members of World Astrology Report on the website and YouTube members at correspondent tier. And remember, members get access to all previous streams as well as the extended versions of my regular videos, including this one. Hope to see you in the stream. Thanks for listening, and now back to the video. In this video, we're going to pick up where we left off in the last video on this channel, in which we covered the ideas of Sri Yukteswar, as well as the authors David Selby and Joseph Steinmetz's extrapolation of his work in their book, The Yugas. If you haven't seen that video already, I suggest you watch it before carrying on with this one. In this episode, we're going to focus on the ascending half of the Yuga cycle that we find ourselves in now. Remember, the bottoming of the cycle came in the year 500 AD, which saw the end of the descending Kali Yuga and the beginning of the ascending Kali Yuga. According to Sri Yukteswar's framework, this was the darkest period in history. It was the beginning of what historians of Europe used to call the Dark Ages. Around this time, Rome fell, India was invaded by the Huns, and China was fragmented. Interestingly, the year 536 AD has been called the worst year in human history. That year, a massive volcanic eruption blocked out the sun, causing crops to fail around the world and triggering a volcanic winter. Looking at the year 500 AD as a kind of pivot point reveals some interesting patterns. Selby and Steinmetz say this: modern historians, due to their straight-line development approach to understanding the past, maintain that each event, invention, or new bit of knowledge is built on inventions and knowledge that came before it. But there is a clear record of mechanical and astronomical knowledge that was known in descending Kali Yuga, which became lost and forgotten for more than 1,000 years before the knowledge was rediscovered in ascending Kali Yuga. For example, the Romans knew how to construct water mills, and the Greek inventor Heron of Alexandria described hundreds of inventions, including a kind of proto-steam engine and windmills. And there's the incredible Antikythera mechanism, which could calculate the motions of the planets and predict eclipses. After the descent through the descending Kali Yuga and the entry into the ascending Kali Yuga, it took until the 9th and 10th centuries for windmills and water mills to re-emerge. And nothing rivaling the Antikythera mechanism emerged until the invention of mechanical clocks in the 13th century. We see the same pattern in philosophy and literature. Consider the European Renaissance, which came in the 15th and 16th centuries towards the end of the ascending Kali Yuga. That period had a lot in common with the Golden Age of Greece, from about 650 to 350 BC, near the start of the descending Kali Yuga. In fact, the Renaissance was sparked by the rediscovery of Greek philosophy in Europe. There's an interesting symmetry here, as illustrated by this diagram from the Yugas. In 1543, Copernicus published his book on the revolution of the heavenly spheres, in which he laid out what was then a revolutionary theory, that the Earth was not the center of the cosmos, and that it actually revolved around the sun. But this idea wasn't new. It had just lain dormant for a long time. In 250 BC, the Greek astronomer Aristarchus of Samos had proposed that the Earth revolved around the sun. Copernicus later acknowledged that Aristarchus had inspired his own heliocentric theory. And so Sri Yukteswar's model of the Yuga cycle makes sense of this trend, of knowledge being lost and then recovered. The standard model of linear development can't really explain this kind of thing. And things get really interesting when we look at the period of the transition out of the Kali Yuga. In the year 1600, the 100-year twilight of the Kali Yuga began, and it was followed by the 200-year dawn of the Dwapara Yuga. That means that the Dwapara Yuga proper began in the year 1900, and that we're now in the year 325 Dwapara. So the period of 1600 to 1900 was a kind of transitional period from the Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, into the Dwapara Yuga, the Energy Age. Sri Yukteswar predicted that there would be an explosion of knowledge as this age got going, and I think we can all agree that he was right about that. He also said that Dwapara Yuga would be characterized by people becoming able to perceive the, quote, fine matters and electricities that create the universe. In the year 1600, the very year that the transition from the Kali Yuga to the Dwapara Yuga began, the physician and proto-scientist William Gilbert coined the term electricus, which later became electricity. Between the years 1700 and 1900, we made the major discoveries around electricity, including Benjamin Franklin's discovery that lightning was electrical in 1752, Hans Christian Ørsted's discovery of electromagnetism in 1820, the invention of the first electrical motor in 1821, and Maxwell's unification of electricity and magnetism with his famous equations in 1864. Now, as we've seen, Sri Yukteswar wrote The Holy Science in 1894. Around this time, the world was being electrified, mostly due to the work of two genius inventors, Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. Tesla perhaps best exemplified the spirit of the dawning energy age. He famously said that if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. He was famously working on techniques to transmit energy wirelessly. The story goes that when he discovered this, the great financier of the period, J.P. Morgan, pulled his support from Tesla, asking him, if anyone can draw on the power, where do we put the meter? Whether or not Tesla could have made this wireless power generation technology work at that time is another question, but what he was proposing seems in line with the spirit of the energy age. Now, in 1905, 5 years into the main body of the Dwapara Yuga, Albert Einstein came up with his famous formula, E equals mc squared, which showed that matter was really just condensed energy. And soon after that came the development of quantum physics, which essentially dealt a death blow to materialism, because it was proved that without observation, in other words, without consciousness, matter was insubstantial. Particles behave like waves and don't really exist until they're seen. In other words, their energy. This period of history is about us becoming aware of the energetic forces that constitute reality. The hippies and crystal girls were right all along. This is also why practices like acupuncture, Ayurvedic medicine, Qigong, and Reiki, which involve the manipulation of energy, are booming. Materialists tend to think that this represents a descent back into ignorance. In fact, it's really a reawakening to things that we used to know but have forgotten. Medicine's also going to change in the coming years. We're going to move beyond allopathic medicine, which uses drugs and surgery to treat the symptoms of disease, and embrace medicine that sees disease as a problem with energy flow and treats its root causes. We'll start to see more and more treatments that involve the manipulation of energy. This will include the ancient alternative medicine techniques that we've already mentioned, as well as new ones that involve the manipulation of electromagnetic fields and even treatment with light itself. The late 19th century also saw the emergence of figures like Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, who gave us a new sense of the internal psychological world of the human being and of the competing impulses that drive each one of us from within. And so the Dwapara Yuga will see us gain a much better understanding of what drives each other as human beings. So seen in this light, even things like reality TV serve a purpose. As trashy and as exploitative as they can be, these shows are actually teaching people to understand the motivations of others. And I think that over time, we'll also begin to understand more subtle energies. The acceptance of the reality of psychic abilities will be part of that, as well as the impact of focused intention and our ability to change the world through concentrated thought. And this brings us to another important aspect of the energy age, according to Selby and Steinmetz, the growth of self-interest. In the Kali Yuga, people more or less had to accept their lot. They had very little scope to decide what they wanted to do with their lives. Selby and Steinmetz say this: the vast majority of people who lived during Kali Yuga were farmers, herdsmen, laborers, artisans, conscripted soldiers, servants, or slaves. Average people were passively accepting of their lot. Their passivity expressed itself as fatalistic acceptance of circumstances, lack of will to change, or even the belief that they could change circumstances. There was very little social mobility. Chances were that the circumstances you were born into, whether as a carpenter, farmer, or artisan, were the circumstances you would likely die in. But since the transition from Kali Yuga to Dwapara Yuga began in 1600, human beings have increasingly awakened to self-interest and been able to pursue it. One of the ways this has asserted itself is in the rise of human rights and democracy around the world. We can think here of the American Declaration of Independence and the words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." In general, life for most people has gotten better over the past few hundred years. There's an interesting difference between Selby and Steinmetz and Bibhu Dev Mishra's ideas about the Yuga cycle here. Bibhu told me that he was never convinced by Sri Yukteswar's claim that the Kali Yuga was already over, because if you look around the world, you still see great selfishness wherever you look. That's true, of course. And Selby and Steinmetz acknowledge that too, but they argue that this is really just the early phase of the Dwapara Yuga and is a symptom of an awakening to self-interest. Over time, the selfishness will decline. And as the age progresses, we'll start to realize two important things that will result in a better world. Firstly, the experience of happiness is the result of the free movements of life force in our bodies. We'll learn to control our own life force and be able to summon feelings of happiness at will. And secondly, we'll learn that the experience of personal happiness is enhanced through the expansion of our awareness and of our sympathies. In other words, what we'll eventually learn is that, quote, "the well-being of others is essential to each individual's happiness. As a result, the exploitation, inequity, and injustice we see around us today will gradually come to an end." Growing self-interest also explains another trend we see in the world right now, urbanization. Now, this chart shows the rise in urban population since 1500. We can see how it started to rise rapidly during the transition from the Kali Yuga to the Dwapara Yuga. Remember that in the last video, we saw how the first large cities emerged around 3000 BC during the transition into the descending Dwapara Yuga. Around this time, the Egyptian civilization emerged, and I think that perhaps we get a clue here as to why so many of us are so obsessed with ancient Egypt these days. The Egyptians were the product of an energy age, just as we are. I think that the ongoing work by alternative scholars to try to understand the wisdom and technology of the Egyptians and other Dwapara Yuga peoples is extremely important. The difference between us and them is that they rose out of the Treta Yuga, the mental age, when there was a low global population, while we're rising out of the Kali Yuga, the dark age. Our technology is complicated and mechanistic, and its development is driven entirely by the profit motive. If Sri Yukteswar is right, then over time we'll develop technology that's simpler but more powerful, technology that taps into natural energies and resonances. And we'll take inspiration from what we learn about ancient civilizations like the Egyptians, who understood how to work with principles of energy and resonance better than we do. Of course, we have incredibly powerful technology right now. Part of the problem we have is that it's emerged faster than our wisdom can keep up with it. And that means that these are dangerous times. In the last video on the Yuga cycle, we saw how the Bronze Age collapse came around 1200 BC as the descending Dwapara Yuga was ending. Cultures across the world suddenly disintegrated in an orgy of war and destruction, leading to a period of darkness that lasted several hundred years. We're at a similar point in the ascending Dwapara Yuga now, and our time is similarly dangerous. We have technology of incredible destructive power, but vestiges of the scarcity mindset, the Kali Yuga mentality, remain very strong in most of us. Paramahansa Yogananda said that we possess enough enlightened self-interest to avoid complete destruction, but that, quote, partial dissolution is possible at this time, whether by war or natural disaster. So we're at a very dangerous point in the Yuga cycle. In an article on this cycle, the Vedic scholar David Frawley says this: "We must also recognize that Dwapara Yuga itself is not a spiritual age like Satya Yuga. It is an age of subtle materialism that brings some development over the gross materialism of Kali Yuga. But the powers that Dwapara develops, from electricity to nuclear and the mass media, create their challenges as well, along with their more dangerous weapons and possibility of a greater civilizational collapse. The beginning of Dwapara Yuga can result in wars and disasters greater than Kali Yuga because the energies and weapons are stronger. We should also bear in mind that even in an ascending cycle, there can be steps backwards." Frawley says this: "We should additionally note that the cycle of the Yugas does not proceed in a uniform way, but through a series of transformations, which can have a destructive side. Often the forces of darkness increase or amass before they're eliminated or cast out. So struggles between the powers of light and the powers of darkness can heighten even in an era of generally increasing light, such as we see today." And here I'd like to highlight a trap we can fall into. We're in a very self-interested age, but the realization we all need to make is that your interest is mine and vice versa. More and more of us need to understand the happiness that can come from doing things for others, as clearly lacking right now. But there's a temptation to create societal systems that take away our freedom to grow into better people. I'm thinking here of totalitarian systems like communism, in which the freedom of the individual is subsumed into that of the collective, and where virtue is forced on us from above. A system in which you can't do anything without prostrating yourself to bureaucracy doesn't allow individuals to grow. It's like raising a child. You don't raise a healthy human being by restricting their freedom to the point where they can't make any mistakes and learn from them or test themselves. Of course, they do also need some protection too. I'm not saying we need anarchy either. What we need are systems that favor individual freedom for the mass of people who need to develop their ability to pursue their self-interest. That rules out any systems that give too much power to the state and its institutions, as well as those that give rise to monopolies and corporate fascism, which allow the powerful to restrict the freedom of people to act. The technology that we've built in the energy age makes totalitarian systems possible. And we're seeing that right now with the construction of a digital control grid that could potentially put bankers in total control of the economy and of our everyday lives. My hope is that this plan won't work and that people will push back, because the nature of the times is for people to pursue the path of self-realization, not to live in digital prison. I sometimes wonder if the people who rule the world have a perverted understanding of the Yuga cycle or something like it. It's as if they've read the texts and they know what the golden age is supposed to look like, and they want to force us into a kind of materialistic facsimile of it, one where we're forced to be virtuous rather than becoming virtuous through the cultivation of our natural abilities. The Yuga cycle suggests that eventually we will live in a time when we live in harmony and we all implicitly understand that our self-interest is intertwined. But that time isn't now. And so attempts to use laws and technologies to force us to behave in this way aren't right for the times. This brings to mind some statements that Rudolf Steiner made on the nature of evil. In a lecture entitled "The Karma of Untruthfulness," given in 1916, He said this: "An impulse is not evil in itself. It becomes evil when it appears in the wrong place." And so what's important is not so much what is done, but when it's done. In some respects, the war between conservatives and progressives is really not as much a war over ideals, but one over timing. And this is why an understanding of astrology, and particularly big cycles, can help us to understand what kinds of actions are appropriate and when. And something else that the Yuga cycle doctrine teaches us is that at a civilizational level, spiritual progress takes time. Despite the promises of the New Age, we're probably not going to instantly ascend into a golden age of spiritual enlightenment. Technology isn't going to fix all our problems overnight. These are really two sides of the same millenarian coin. And if you pin all your hopes on this kind of outcome, I suspect you'll be disappointed. That said, if Sri Yukteswar is right, then we really are in a gradual spiritual ascent, and that is something to be hopeful about. Of course, there are certainly times when the pace of change is faster than usual, and I do think we're in one of those right now. And if you want to know some of the reasons I'm saying that, I suggest you watch this video in which we look at one of the big cycles currently shaping the times, the Pluto-Neptune cycle, and see how it suggests we may be on the verge of a spiritual revolution. Now, in the bonus section of this video, available for members of World Astrology Report, whether here on YouTube or at worldastrologyreport.com, we put some important big cycle pieces together: the Yuga cycle, the Age of Aquarius, and the Pluto-Neptune cycle. Because I think I've figured out how these pieces fit together and what they tell us about the nature of our times. Thanks, and see you again very soon.